Hello friends, in this video we will discuss Marx and Engels' the German ideology. In the German ideology, Marx and Engels lay the foundation for historical materialism. Before 1845, German philosophers like the young Hegelians genuinely believed that ideas control the world. They argued that people suffered under tyrants because they had wrong ideas in their heads. If people could change their thinking, society would automatically change. Marx and Engels mocked this view mercilessly. They compare these intellectuals to someone who believes people drown because they are possessed with the idea of gravity, as if removing that idea would make them float safely. The young Hegelians wrote complicated books demanding new ways of thinking, but they never touched a single factory, law, or wage contract. They were actually the most conservative thinkers around because they left the real material world completely untouched. Marx and Engels start from completely different premises. Their starting point is not abstract ideas, but real living human beings with physical bodies. Humans distinguish themselves from animals when they begin producing their own food, clothes, and shelter. By producing these things, humans produce their actual material life. What people are depends entirely on what they produce and how they produce it. These are not arbitrary assumptions, they are facts we can verify through observation. History cannot begin without real physical humans who must interact with nature to survive. Marx and Engels identify several fundamental conditions that exist in every human society. Before humans can write poetry or debate philosophy, they must eat, drink, find shelter, and clothe themselves. This is the first historical act, the production of material goods to satisfy basic needs. This must happen every single day just to keep humanity alive. The second condition is that once a basic need is satisfied, the action of satisfying it and the tools used lead to new needs. Human development keeps moving forward because our material activity constantly creates new requirements. The third condition is that humans reproduce themselves through families and procreation, creating the first social bonds. These conditions exist together, not one after another. From these conditions, Marx concludes that the production of life has two sides, natural and social. It's natural because it involves biological survival, and social because it requires cooperation between people. The way people organize themselves to work determines their entire social structure. A certain way of producing things always combines with a certain way of cooperating. This mode of cooperation itself acts as a productive force. Consciousness only appears after these material foundations are established. Consciousness is not a pure spark from heaven, it is a social product. Language arises from the practical need to communicate with others. Consciousness only becomes specialized when there is a split between physical work and mental work. When the people who do farming and manufacturing are separated from the people who do thinking and preaching, consciousness begins to believe its pure theory, independent of the physical world. But if philosophy contradicts reality, it's only because the underlying material forces have come into conflict with social relations. Marx traces how the material world creates the illusions we call ideology through the history of property. Tribal ownership matches an undeveloped stage where people live by hunting or simple farming with social structure extending from the family. Ancient communal ownership emerges when tribes unite into cities, with citizens holding power over slaves through communal property. Feudal ownership arises in the Middle Ages, rooted in the countryside rather than cities. Instead of slaves, the ruling nobility exploits serfs bound to the land, while in towns, guild masters control journeymen and apprentices. As industry and commerce expand, property shifts from natural forms like land ownership into instruments of production like accumulated labor and capital. This gives rise to civil society, which fully develops with the rise of the capitalist class. To protect their private property, the bourgeoisie organizes itself nationally through the state. Marx strips away the myth that the state serves the common good. In reality, the state is simply the form of organization that the ruling class adopts to guarantee their property and interests. Similarly, civil law is not pure justice, it's just property relations reduced to abstract rules that protect the owners of production. This brings us to one of Marx's most famous ideas. The ideas of the ruling class are in every epoch the ruling ideas. The class that owns the factories, land, and banks also controls the universities, publishing houses, and media. Therefore, the thoughts of those who lack access to mental production are generally shaped by ruling ideas. During an era of aristocratic rule, concepts of honor and loyalty dominate. When the bourgeoisie rules, concepts of freedom, equality, and free competition are treated as eternal truths. But these are simply the material relationships of dominance turned into ideas. Marx and Engels specifically criticize Feuerbach, who was a materialist rejecting religious spirits and accepted the physical world. However, Feuerbach was what Marx calls contemplative materialist. He looked at nature and humans merely as objects of the senses, but he did not see them as the result of ongoing human work. Marx gives a simple example. Feuerbach might look at a cherry tree and treat it as a purely natural object, but in reality, that cherry tree was brought to Europe by trade centuries ago. It exists in Germany only because of human industry and agriculture. The world around us is not an unchanging natural given, it is the historic product of human labor. If human industry were interrupted for even a year, the entire physical landscape and human perception would completely vanish. Feuerbach's error is that whenever he sees millions of miserable workers living in conditions that destroy their health, he simply calls it an abnormality and moves on. He remains a theorist who only wants to interpret the world correctly, but for the practical materialist, the communist, the objective is to practically attack and change the existing world. Feuerbach's contemplation is passive, revolutionary action is active. Under modern big industry, the division of labor becomes so extreme that productive forces take on a life of their own. They become independent, alien powers tied to the world market, standing over the individuals who created them. The majority of people are robbed of their real life content and turned into abstract individuals. Their only remaining link to productive forces is labor, which has lost all elements of self activity and exists purely to sustain their bare biological survival. This creates a historical tipping point. Productive forces under private property transform into destructive forces, machinery and money that cause crisis, unemployment, and war. This produces a class that bears all burdens of society without enjoying its advantages. This class forms the majority and develops the consciousness that radical revolution is necessary, the proletariat. Up until now, human association has always taken the form of an illusory community. In a state or guild, individuals combined only as average individuals belonging to a specific economic class. They were unfree because they were subject to the violence of economic circumstances and the division of labor. Communism differs from all previous historical movements. It overthrows the basis of all earlier relations of production. For the first time, it consciously treats all material conditions as the creations of human beings. It strips away their independent alien character and subjects them to the collective power of united individuals. In the real community created by communism, individuals participate not as cogs or class members but as real unique individuals. By abolishing private property and the division of labor, humanity gains control over the conditions of its own free development. Marx and Engels have achieved a foundational inversion of how we understand history. Idealism starts from heaven and descends to earth. It begins with what people say, imagine, or conceive, and tries to understand real people from their thoughts. Materialism starts from earth and ascends to heaven. It begins with real active people and explains the development of their ideological reflections from their actual life process. As Marx and Engels beautifully summarize, circumstances make men just as much as men make circumstances. We are born into an inherited world of productive forces and capital, but we possess the collective power to revolutionize these conditions. True liberation cannot be achieved by changing words or criticizing dogmas. Liberation is a historical act driven by material developments. The German ideology teaches us that if we want to change the world, we must stop arguing with the shadows of reality and start organizing to transform reality itself.